All right, chapter 7 Mudbloods and Murmurs. Harry spent a lot of his time the next few days dodging out of sight whenever he saw Gilderoy Lockhart coming down a corridor. Harder to avoid was Colin Creevy, who seemed to have memorized Harry's schedule. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry," 6 or 7 times a day. Hello, Colin. Back. To hear hello, Colin back, however, exasperated Harry sounded when he said it. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the disastrous car journey, and Ron's wand was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of Ron's hand in Charms class and hitting tiny old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating a rather large, throbbing green boil where it had struck. So, with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron, and Hermione were planning to visit Hagrid on Saturday morning. Harry, however, was shaken awake several hours earlier, when he would have liked Oliver Wood, captain of Gryffindor's team. What's the matter?" said Harry groggily. "Quidditch practice," said Wood. "Come on." Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink gold sky. Now that he was awake, he couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket of the birds were making. "Oliver," Harry croaked. "It's the crack of dawn." "Exactly," said Wood. He was a tall and burly 6th year, and at the moment his eyes were gleaming with crazed enthusiasm. "It's part of our new training program. Come on, grab your broom. Let's go," said Wood hardly. "None of the other teams have started training yet. We're going to be the first one off the mark this year." Yawning, shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robes. "Good man," said Wood. "Meet you at the field in 15 minutes." When he had found the scarlet team robes, he pulled on his cloak for warmth. Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he'd gone and went down to the spiral staircase in the common room, in his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait when there was a clatter behind him. Colin Creevy came dashing down the spiral staircase with his camera, swinging madly around his neck, something clutched in his hand. I heard someone saying your name on the stairs, Harry. Look what I've got here. I had it developed and I wanted to show you." Harry looked bemusedly at the photograph of Colin was brandishing him under his nose. A moving black and white Lockhart is tugging hard on Harry's arm and recognized his own. He was pleased to see that his photographic self was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave him a slumped panting against the white edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," said Harry flatly, glancing around to check that the room was not really deserted. "Sorry, Colin. I'm in a hurry. Quidditch practice." He climbed through the portrait hole. "Oh, wow! Wait for me. I've never watched a Quidditch game before." Colin scrambled through the hole after him. "It'll be really boring," Harry said quickly, but Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in 100 years, weren't you, Harry? Weren't you?" said Colin, trotting along beside him. "You must be brilliant. Oh, I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your own broom? Is that the best one there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow. "I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. "Is it true that there are 4 balls and that 2 of them fly around trying to knock people off their brooms?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned to explain the complicated rules of Quidditch. "They're called bludgers, and there are 2 beaters, one on each team, to carry clubs to beat the bludgers away from their side. Fred and George Weasley are Gryffindor's beaters." "And what are the other balls for?" Colin asked, tripping down the couple of steps because he was gazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the biggish red one, is the one that scores goals. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffles to each other and try to get it through the goalposts at the end of the pitch. There are 3 long poles with hoops at the end. And the 4th ball? That is the golden snitch, said Harry, and it's very small and it's very fast and it's very difficult to catch. But that's what the seekers got to do because of the game of Quidditch doesn't end until the snitch has been caught. And whichever team the seeker gets the snitch earns the team the extra 150 points. And you're Gryffindor seeker, aren't you? Said Colin. In awe. Yes, said Harry. He left the castles and started across the drenched grass. And there's the keeper, too. He guards the goalposts. That's it, really. But Colin didn't stop asking questions. Harry all the way down to the sloping lawns of the Quidditch field, and Harry only shook him off when he reached the changing rooms. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and get a seat, Harry!" And he hurried off to the sands. The rest of Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George Weasley were sitting puffy-eyed and tousle-haired next to the fourth-year Alicia Spinnet, who seemed to be nodding off against the wall behind her. Her fellow chasers, Katie Bell and Angela Johnson, were yawning side by side opposite them. "There you are, Harry. What kept you?" said Wood briskly. "Now, I wanted to quick talk with you before we actually get onto the field because I spent all summer devising a whole new training program, which I think will really make it all the difference." Wood was holding up a large diagram of a Quidditch field, on where were drawn many lines, arrows, and crosses, and different colored inks. He took out the wand, tapped the board, and then the arrows began to wiggle all over the diagram like caterpillars. As soon as Wood launched into his speech about his new tactics, Fred and Weasley's head dropped into Alice and Spinnet's shoulder, and they began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and a third one, and Harry sank into a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood at long last, jerking Harry from his wistful fantasy about how he could be eating breakfast at this very moment up at the castle. "Is that clear? Any questions?" "I've got a question, Oliver," said George, who had woken with a start. "Why couldn't you have told us all yesterday when we were awake?" Wood wasn't pleased. "Now listen here, you lot," he said, glowering at them. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We're easily the best team, but unfortunately, owing to circumstances beyond our control—" Harry shifted guiltily in his seat. He had been unconscious in the hospital wing for the final match for the previous year, meaning that Gryffindor had to play a player short and suffer their worst defeat in 300 years. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. The last defeat was clearly still torturing him. "So this year we train harder than before. Okay, let's go and get our new theories into practice," Wood shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading them all the way to the locker room. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. They all had been in the locker room so long that the sun was up completely now, through the remnants of the mist hung over the grass in the stadium. As Harry walked into the field, he saw Ron and Hermione sitting in the stands. "Aren't you finished yet?" called Ron incredulously. "Haven't even started," said Harry, looking jealously at the toast and marmalade Ron and Hermione had brought out of the great hall. "Wood's been teaching us our new moves." He mounted his broomstick and kicked off the ground, soaring up into the air. The cool morning air whipped his face, waking him far more effectively than Wood's long talk. It felt wonderful to be back on the Quidditch field. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, facing Fred and George. "What's that funny clicking noise?" called Fred. They hurled around the corner. Harry turned to the stands. Colin was sitting there in one of the highest seats and the camera raised, taking pictures after picture after picture, the sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. "Look this way, Harry, this way!" he cried shrilly. "Who's that?" said Fred. "No idea," Harry lied, putting his spur of speed that took him far away as possible from Colin. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning as he skimmed through the air towards him. "Why, that first you're taking pictures. I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy, trying to find out about our new training program." "He's in Gryffindor," said Harry quickly. "And the Slytherin don't need a spy, Oliver," said George. "What makes you say that?" said George testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing to several people in green robes who were walking out to the field with their broomsticks in hand. "I don't believe it," Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the field for today." "Well, we'll see about this." Wood shot towards the ground, landing rather hard, as he meant to in his anger, and staggering slightly dismounted Harry and Fred followed. "Flint!" Wood bellowed, the Slytherin captain. "This is our practice time. We got it up especially for it. You can clear the field. You can clear off now." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had took a trollish cunning on his face and replied, "Plenty of room for all of us, Wood." Angela, Alicia, and Katie came over too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. "But I booked the field," said Wood positively, spitting with rage. "I booked it." "Ah," said Flint, "but I got specially signed note here from Professor Snape. I, Professor Snape, give Slytherin team permission to practice today on the Quidditch field, owing to the need to train their new seeker." "You've got a new seeker," said Wood, distracted. "Where?" And from behind 6 large figures before their seventh smaller boy, smirking all over his pale, pointed face, was Draco Malfoy. "Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son?" said Fred, looking at Malfoy with dislike. "Funny you should mention Draco's father," said Flint. The whole Slytherin team smiled more broadly. "Let me show you the generous gift he made to our Slytherin team." All 7 of them held up their broomsticks. 7 highly polished, brand new handles, and 7 sets of fine gold lettering spelling Nimbus 2001 gleamed under the Gryffindors' noses in the early morning sun. "Very latest model. Only came out last month," said Flint, carelessly flicking a speck of dust from the end of his own. "Oh, I believe it outstrips even the old Nimbus 2000 series to be considered a considerable amount. As for the clean sweeps," he smiled nastily at Fred and George, who were clutching clean sweeps 5s. "Sweeps the board with them." None of the Gryffindor team could think of anything to say. For a moment Malfoy was smirking broadly, his cold eyes reduced to slits. "Oh, look," said Flint. "A field invasion." Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. "What's happening?" said Ron. Asked Harry. "Why aren't you playing? What's he doing here?" He was looking at Malfoy, taking in the Slytherin Quidditch robes. "I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley," said Malfoy, snugly. "Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father bought." The team, Ron gaped, open-mouthed at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. "Good, aren't they?" said Malfoy smoothly. "But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get some new brooms too. You would raffle off those clean sweep 5s. I expect a museum would be put in a bid for them." The Slytherin team howled with laughter. "At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in," said Hermione sharply. "They got there on pure talent." The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy mudblood," he spat. Harry knew at once Malfoy had something really bad, because there was an instant uproar in his woods. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George jumping on him. Alicia shrieked, "How dare you!" And Ron plunged his hand into his robes, pulled out his wand, yelling, "You'll pay for that one, Malfoy!" and pointed furiously under Flint's arms at Malfoy's face. A loud bang echoed in the stadium, and the jet of green light shot out from the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him stomach and ending him reeling backwards into the grass.